My car glided slowly along the deserted road, the heat from the engine fading little by little as I drove under a black, almost impenetrable sky. I was used to these isolated roads, but that night, I felt as if the entire universe had forgotten me. A faint mist hovered over the asphalt, and my headlights revealed nothing but darkness. Not a single star. Then, in the distance, a shape emerged. A gas station, strangely lit. It was as if a small pocket of life had been carved out in the vast blackness surrounding me. The sign read open, yet there were no cars. I pulled over, the scent of gasoline lingering in the air. Strangely, the silence felt heavier than the atmosphere. My headlights illuminated the station, but there was no sign of life inside, just an abandoned space. Something is off here, I thought as I stepped out of the car. I moved forward, my footsteps echoing on the cold concrete. The door creaked slightly in the wind. With a hesitant hand, I turned the handle. A sharp creak pierced the silence, and I stepped inside. The air was slightly cooler than outside, but it wasn't the chill that struck me. It was the stillness. Absolute silence, broken only by the faint buzzing of a few flickering neon lights. I made my way to the counter. The place seemed frozen, as if time itself had decided to take a well-deserved break. That's when I noticed the sign on the counter, displaying strange rules. If you enter, you must wait for the next customer. The next customer? Before I could think any further, the neon lights flickered off. A moment of total darkness, then they buzzed back to life. I turned sharply. A man was there, standing just behind me, only a few steps away. He had no face, no recognizable features. It was as if a shadow had been frozen into human form. Slowly, he raised an arm, as if to signal something. That's when I saw the menu behind the counter. But it wasn't a normal menu. No, it was a board filled with dishes with unpronounceable names, drinks that seemed straight out of a nightmare. I understood. This customer, or whatever he had become, had expectations. Caught in a moment of uncertainty, I took a deep breath before attempting an approach. He was just a customer, right? A simple late-night patron, lost in this strange station at the edge of the world, just like me. I tried to stay calm, clinging to the normality of routine gestures. "Good evening. Do you need anything?" I asked, my voice a little too loud, as if to fill the suffocating silence. The faceless man didn't respond immediately. He didn't even move, barely a breath. Then, in an almost fluid motion, he looked at me, but where his eyes should have been, there was only emptiness. And yet, I felt something, a presence taking shape right in front of me. I quickly looked away. Slowly, the man pointed at the menu behind the counter. His fingers seemed to dissolve into the air, formless, insubstantial, as if his arm extended into a cloud of darkness. "I'll prepare something for you," I stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. My gaze flicked to the board, desperate to understand what I was supposed to serve. I scanned the dishes. Sand sushi, shooting star soup, lunar duskrat. Absurd names, as if this station belonged to no earthly logic. But I had to make a choice. Shooting star soup. That sounded harmless, right? Shooting star soup, then... I muttered, more to myself than to him. Then I turned to the fridge behind me, which was anything but orderly. Multicolored boxes with labels in an unknown language, opaque jars, bizarre tubes. I grabbed a container labeled cosmic liquid and glanced back at the customer, hoping he would accept this strange choice. "I'll prepare it now, but it'll be ready in just a moment. You can sit if you'd like." The man remained silent. He barely moved, settling into a corner of the station, still faceless. Just a void of darkness that seemed to watch my every move. I started pouring the strange liquid into a large cup, silently praying I wouldn't mess this up. A faint sound came from the bottom of the cup, as if something inside was bubbling and slowly taking shape. A vaporous mist rose from the liquid, floating in the air. Suddenly, I heard a soft voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't the customer. It was something else. You know, every order you serve costs you something precious. I jolted and dropped the cup, which landed with a dull thud. But the faceless man still didn't react. He remained there, motionless. Just a presence. Was this a warning or a trap? I leaned over the cup, my hand trembling, before pulling myself together. I had to focus. I couldn't fail. This customer had to be satisfied. The price of failure, the price of forgetting. What memories was I willing to sacrifice? I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the shivers crawling up my spine, and focused on the soup. Thoughts swirled my head. The voice, the warning, that strange presence. But the rule was clear, and I had no choice. The customer, or whatever he had become, was waiting. I had to serve. I bent over the cup again. The cosmic liquid kept bubbling, its surface shifting like a stormy sky, tiny flashes of light flickering briefly before vanishing. I grabbed a spoon, oddly vintage, almost too old for a modern gas station. The air grew heavier with each movement I made. The soup seemed to expand, folding in on itself. Its edges blurred, and strange patterns emerged. Fragments of forgotten universes. Constellations, nebulae. The cup trembled in my hands. That's when I remembered the sign. Do not ask questions. Now wasn't the time to wonder about the liquid or what it contained. I just had to obey. Serve. The faceless man's gaze, if I could even call it that, locked on to me, cold and omnipresent. A disturbing chill ran down my spine. I carefully lifted the cup, my hand unsteady. Your soup, sir. Without a word, the man extended an empty hand and, with a slow gesture, took the cup. A freezing tension filled the room, the air growing suffocating. He lifted the cup to where his mouth should have been, but there was nothing. No mouth, just a silhouette. Yet somehow, he seemed to drink, as if the liquid passed through the air, like an invisible thread suspended in time. Then, suddenly, he stopped. And that's when it happened. That void, his gaze without a face, shifted toward me. The faceless man jerked. The cup slipped from his hands, crashing to the ground with a strange, distorted shimmer, as if light itself bent around it. A sound, like a scream, distant yet piercing, rippled through the walls. The silence, the heavy silence from before, shattered violently. The customer, he hadn't eaten the soup. No, he had absorbed something else. Something beyond the meal. I blinked, and that's when I felt it. A void. Deep. Irreversible. A memory. I didn't know which one. Just a vague image, blurred. Something I had once known. But it was gone. The customer turned away, fading into the darkness, as if he had never been there. His presence vanished entirely. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the entrance door slammed shut, and everything went dark again. My phone vibrated in my pocket, but when I pulled out, no signal, and the road I had driven on, gone. A new sign had appeared on the counter. You are now the next employee. The rules were clear. A dull panic rose within me as I stared at the sign. My fingers trembled as the red letters burned themselves into my mind. Time seemed to slow, and an icy cold crept into every corner of my being. I didn't want to end up like that faceless customer. I had to leave. I needed to leave. I rushed to the door, hoping it would open like before, but it resisted. Locked. I tried again, harder this time, but nothing. Not a sound. Just the heavy rhythm of my own breathing. My eyes darted around, searching frantically for a solution. The station seemed bigger, warped. The walls were closing in. Then I remembered a rule. You must respond exactly to the requests. Maybe that was the key. But respond to what? Exactly? Who's going to ask me for anything more? That's when my gaze fell on something I hadn't noticed before. A small intercom on the counter. I hadn't seen it until now. But suddenly, it seemed to invite me to use it. A simple, smooth red button. Bright, urgent. There was only one thing to do. Press it. I stepped toward the intercom, my finger hesitating over the button. And, in a final act of defiance against the unknown, I pressed it. The silence shattered with a metallic sound, followed by a calm voice. Calm, yet entirely unfamiliar. "Welcome, employee. You have activated the departure alarm." My legs nearly gave out beneath me. The departure alarm? That wasn't in the rules. I forced myself to breathe. A way out, maybe. Congratulations. You now have a chance to escape. However, the voice was cold. Be aware that any attempt to flee will trigger an irreversible process. You have 1 minute. I felt paralyzed. If I made a mistake, it was over. If I chose wrong, I'd become one of those faceless employees. I scanned the room, desperate for an exit. Then I remembered something from the sign. If you enter, you must wait for the next customer. I turned sharply toward the window. The road, the fog was thicker than ever, but I could make out a shape in the distance. A silhouette, another customer. This was my chance. I ran to the door, throwing myself against it, and this time, it opened. The fog swallowed me immediately. The silhouette moved closer, as if it had been waiting for me. But the further I stepped into the mist, the heavier the air became. The silhouette, the next customer, was too blurry, too wrong. As I crossed the threshold, the intercom's voice rang out again, louder this time, echoing in my mind. An employee who flees only becomes another employee. A silent scream rose in my chest, but I forced myself forward. One last step, and I felt the world twist around me. The blurry figure dissolved into countless shadows. This wasn't a customer. This was a trap. The moment I took my final step out of the station, the ground collapsed beneath me. I fell, plunging to the other side. I landed somewhere new, this time on an even emptier road. But the station was gone. I turned frantically, searching for any sign of it. But everything was black, empty. And then, the voice spoke one last time in my head. You were never truly free. There will always be another customer. A freezing chill crawled down my spine. I lifted my eyes. In the distance, a new gas station flickered to life, its lights unnaturally bright. And this time, I knew I would return. I stood there on the desolate road, my hands shaking, my heart hammering in my chest. I felt like I was floating in some parallel space, a place where I could never go back to my normal life, where I could never escape the station. I lifted my gaze, and in front of me, the road stretched endlessly. I felt like I was right back where I started, just before seeing the station for the first time. But the further I walked, the more I felt it, that sensation of being watched, a weight pressing down on my shoulders. I had to go home. I climbed into my car, slamming the door shut with desperate force. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, purring like a predator ready to hunt. That was a sign, wasn't it? I could leave. Everything was fine. I would drive, go home, forget these faceless customers and that abandoned station. The headlights illuminated the road. The wind rushed into the car, and the sound of the engine was finally soothing. But as I drove faster and faster, I began to see things. Shadows on the sides of the road, indistinct shapes that vanished the moment I looked directly at them. The fog thickened. The trees grew more twisted. Everything blurred, as if I were trapped in a dream that refused to dissipate. The ground seemed to slip away beneath me. What had started as a simple drive now felt like an endless trial. I turned the wheel sharply, trying to escape this spiral. But the road remained unchanged. It was always the same, endless and infinite. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded, barely avoiding the edge of the road. I rushed out, my feet hitting the rough asphalt. The station was there. It appeared before me once again, like a mirage. The same as always, with its flickering neon lights and the sign that seemed to taunt me. Why am I still here? I thought, but before I could take another step, I heard a voice, weak, broken, behind me. It was the voice of the faceless man. There is no return. I turned abruptly, but this time, I couldn't see him. I couldn't see anything. but I knew the shadow of the customer was watching me. I could feel it. Every fiber of my being tensed. No return. I finally understood, with chilling clarity, that this road had no end. The gas station was the only reality that existed for me now. I was trapped, but I had to keep trying. I had to find a way out. I rushed to the intercom, this time without hesitation. The red button was there, a desperate call, a last hope. I pressed it without a second thought. The familiar voice spoke immediately, colder than ever. "You have activated the escape mechanism." I felt my heart pounding in my temples, a wave of dread washing over me. I couldn't give in to fear. I had to stay lucid. But there is no escape. You are in the loop. This station, this road, this moment. That's all there is. I looked around. The station's windows blurred, everything growing hazy once more. The silhouette of the customer appeared behind the door, and for the first time, I felt no fear. It was like an acceptance, a surrender. But then, I sensed something different in the air. A colder wind, a force distorting space. Something was about to change. The faceless customer took a step forward, and the station wavered, as if it were about to dissolve. But a distant cry echoed, a voice filled with pain and fear. No, not him. It was my voice, my own memory, the one I had lost. I struggled, fought against the pull, but the station was drawing me in, stronger and stronger. The voice on the intercom cut out abruptly. Everything froze. I'm not giving up. I'll find another flaw, something even bolder. The tension rises again. A deep rage surged within me, a burning desire to break free from this infernal loop. I wouldn't be trapped here, doomed to wander endlessly in this nightmare. I had to find a way out, no matter the cost. The rules, the station, the faceless man. This couldn't be all there was. I looked at the station once more, its flickering neon lights, its almost familiar facade. The door seemed to call me, and the cold voice of the intercom still echoed in my mind, menacing. But something inside me refused to obey these rules. I had to break this loop. I turned my gaze toward the counter, toward the small sign I had barely noticed earlier. The words were still there. If you enter, you must wait for the next customer. But one detail caught my attention. What if the rule didn't say to wait for a customer, but rather a new customer? My mind raced, desperately searching for something I had overlooked. I remembered how the faceless man had appeared, like an ethereal figure, with no real form. What if this station didn't rely on customers entering, but on those who stayed? Me. Maybe I was the one who had to be replaced. And what if the station could lose its employee? What if I didn't become the customer? The solution became clear in my mind. A flaw in the rules, a loophole to exploit. I didn't need to wait for another customer. I could become the one who took the other's place. I rushed to the intercom, my hands shaking, my breath unsteady. I forced myself to press the button once more, and this time I spoke, my voice clear and determined. I am not a customer. The metallic voice responded immediately, colder than ever, but there was something different, a hesitation in its words. You are not a customer. I felt the atmosphere shift around me, as if an invisible wind blew through the station, a pressure in the air that made the walls flicker. I had found the crack. I am not an employee either, I said, my voice calm but defiant. I closed my eyes for a moment, bracing for the unknown. I was ready to break the system. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the station. The neon lights flickered violently, as if reality itself was fracturing. And then, a deep rumble. The ground trembled beneath me. Then who are you? The voice asked, now lower, more menacing. I had no time to answer. The station twisted, the walls distorting around me. The rules were collapsing. I felt an invisible force pulling me toward the counter. The entrance door, normally locked, swung open in a burst of light, revealing a dark, empty road. I ran outside, but as I did, I noticed something strange. The station's neon lights remained on, like a beacon calling me back. I stopped, Memories I had lost floated back into my mind, fragile as shattered glass. I remembered a time when I lived a normal life, far from the station, far from these rules. But those memories felt distant, unreal. I turned, looking at the station one last time. I knew none of this was real, not entirely. I could feel the truth through the fog. Maybe by letting go, by wanting nothing, I could be free. In a final act of defiance, I took a step forward. No customer, no employee. I was nothing. The station hesitated, flickered, then collapsed in a silent explosion of fractured realities. I was no longer trapped. I opened my eyes. A sliver of light filtered through the car's window. For a moment, I remained still, disoriented. The dizziness, the strange nightmare of a gas station, seemed to fade away. I was behind the wheel, alone, in my car. As if nothing had happened, I watched the signs flicker past, the dark trees lining both sides of the road. The night had swallowed me whole. The gas station, that was a dream. I must have dozed off for a moment, maybe after driving too much. Nothing more. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the anxiety still gnawing at my stomach. There was no reason to worry. But despite my attempt at rationalizing, I couldn't shake this strange feeling of detachment, of being watched, as if an invisible force was following me. Suddenly, my eyes caught the rear-view mirror. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't noticed it right away, but a blurry silhouette was taking shape behind me. A car, but the pale glow of its headlights didn't seem natural. Too dim, almost spectral. I pressed the gas pedal harder. The headlights in my mirror grew closer and closer, like a shadow in pursuit. I swerved sharply, hoping to shake off what I desperately wanted to believe was a hallucination. But at every turn, the car behind me seemed even closer, without ever actually accelerating. My gaze flickered inside my car. My phone vibrated on the passenger seat, almost instinctively, as if compelled by something beyond my will. I grabbed it. A message appeared on the screen, from a number I didn't recognize. The next client is on their way. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My eyes darted back to the mirror. The silhouette was still there, and this time, I could make out the faint outline of a human form. I wasn't alone. I clenched my jaw and pushed the speed even further, adrenaline burning through my veins. But deep down, I already knew I wouldn't escape this chase. The road twisted before me. The trees grew more distorted, as if they were alive, as if the very path itself was holding me back. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I looked up. The gas station was there. It hadn't disappeared. It stood on the side of the road, exactly where I didn't want it to be. The flickering sign buzzed faintly, and through the station's broken window, I could just make out the small counter inside. A shadow moved behind the door. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt, but in that precise moment, I knew this was no mere apparition. I had come back, and the station had never stopped waiting for me. The car behind me, that eerie silhouette, came to a halt. The client, still blurred, was waiting. A deep unease settled over me, a realization sinking into my bones. I wasn't free. I had never been free. Slowly, I turned my head, but when I looked again, there was nothing. No station, no empty road. Only me, sitting in my car, alone, in a world that hadn't changed. But in the depths of my eyes, a flicker of doubt. Would I lose myself again in this endless loop? I took one last glance at my rearview mirror. This time, the reflection was empty. But in the fog of my mind, one question lingered. What if this wasn't over? The empty road stretched out before me, endless. The car rolled at a steady pace. Nothing seemed capable of stopping it, and the station, somewhere in the shadows, was never far away.